Thanks for tuning in. In the previous videos, I talked about the creation story and what we can learn from them. In those stories, we meet a few characters, Adam and Eve, and we learn about what God's plan was for them and then how they failed to live up to that plan. But even though they're kicked out of the garden, God still loves them. They still get on with their life. They start a family, and their first two sons, Cain and Abel, have a typical brother relationship in the sense that they are in competition with each other. We learn that Cain works in the fields with the crops, and Abel is out in the pasture with the animals. Both of them make a sacrifice, an offering to God, and Abel's is received and Cain's isn't. And we don't learn why, but we know that Cain is bitter about this. God even reaches out to Cain and explains to him, listen, if you do what is right, then you will be rewarded. That's how this works. So do right. Well, Cain still holds bitterness and anger towards God and towards Abel. So one day, Cain and Abel go off to the field together. And while they are there, Cain kills his brother Abel. Nobody else is watching, but God sees, of course. So God calls out to Cain and asks if he knows where Abel is. And Cain responds in an odd way, but in a predictable way, in an immature way. Cain responds with a question. And questions can accomplish a lot. If you ask the right question at the right time, you can demonstrate your own intelligence. If you ask a good question, a hard question, you can ask a question to undermine the authority of the person who's confronting you. You can use a good question to demonstrate your innocence. And this is what Cain is trying to do here, when he responds by saying, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Well, this is a rhetorical question. Rhetorical questions are ones we ask where there is no answer. We're not expecting an answer. The answer is sort of obvious. So Cain is asking a question, and he thinks that the answer is obvious, and that answer is no. No, Cain, you are a free man to do what you want. Abel is a free man. You're not in charge of him. Am I my brother's keeper? Well, if we read this story as simply a recounting of historical events, well, then we don't learn much from the story itself. We only learn that Cain is immature and can't take responsibility for his actions. But that's not the whole story. Cain is using this question to challenge God's authority. But God can see through this, and I believe the storyteller, the narrator, sees through this, and we as the reader are supposed to answer the question instead of God. Cain asks, "Am I my brother's keeper?" assuming that the answer is no. But the question comes back then to us. Was Cain Abel's keeper? Was he his guardian? Was Cain responsible for Abel? Well, the answer is yes. The answer is definitely yes. And we can try to use questions like this to demonstrate our innocence. But that turns around on us, as it did on Cain. Because Abel's blood cried out to God. And God knew there had been an injustice. God knew that Cain had failed his duty. And some people will argue that the whole rest of the Bible, certainly the rest of the book of Genesis, is a response to this question. Am I my brother's keeper? Well, Abraham demonstrates that he is Lot's keeper by watching out for him. Jacob and Esau represent the same sort of brotherly struggle, And we realize that, yes, they have a duty for each other, not just because they are family, but because they are part of God's creation. In the story, Cain asks what he thinks is a rhetorical question. Am I my brother's keeper? Thinking the answer was obvious and that the answer was no. Well, the story turns it around and asks us the same question. Are you outraged at Abel's death? Are you outraged at the shedding of innocent blood? Well, if you are, then you are your brother's keeper. Then yes, we are all our sister's keepers and our neighbor's keepers. We are all in this together. That is the answer to Cain's question. Thanks for watching.